Hello and welcome to Love, Dating, and Relationships for Spiritual Women. My name is Julie Grimm and I'm the host of this show. I am a spiritual guide and healer in the Modern Mystery School and the lineage of King Solomon, and I support people in having empowered relationships in all of their life. I'm super excited today to have Elizabeth Karina here, who is a dating coach for the modern high value woman. So welcome, Elizabeth. So excited to have you.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes. I love, I don't know much about your story, so I'm going to learn a lot, but I love even so much of what I've read so far and what we've discussed offline about what you have to share for women. I think it is really important and really actually accessible for most women today when they're struggling in finding love in their life. So I'm excited to hear your wisdom.
Yeah, so excited to share it.
Perfect. So tell me a little bit more. I know that in your work, you discussed for your own personal journey, you had to really start with yourself. So can you talk to us about what that looked like? That, needing to do a little bit of self-work before you can be open to finding that relationship?
Yeah, so for me, my early 20s was dating and I kept like falling for these guys who were ultimately like unavailable. And there may have been signs at different points and I would kind of just ignore it. And I was falling in love with them. So like, it's gonna work out. Like just thinking like, if I just show up in the right way, if I like learn the right things to say, like that'll make the difference. And then he'll like want to commit to me. He'll want to be my boyfriend. And so I was
Isn't
just
that
like,
the dating, not to interrupt you, but isn't
yeah,
that the dating advice that we get? That's the dating advice I got from all of the Cosmo magazines, from and that's sort of, I'm passionate about it because that's part of why I wanted to create this series. I feel like so much of the dating advice is like, how can I be different than who I really am in order to make probably this emotionally unavailable person like want to be in the relationship with me?
yeah. And that was like the path that I fell down. I really fell hard for this guy. My very, very early 20s, I think I was like 20 years old. And I was just like, okay, like I need to not mess this up. Like, what are the things to do so I don't screw it up? And like the only reason I could possibly have been like that anxious about it was like part of me knew he's not really like gonna commit. And so I fell down that whole rabbit hole of like reading all the books, the YouTube videos, all the things about like what is the right thing to say and to do, and like how do you appear high value versus actually just knowing that you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
almost, and
I
that thing
tried
too
all of
about how do
it.
you, it's like, I love what you said about you were anxious because actually there was something to be anxious about,
Mm,
and so rather than look at that, like, oh, what's really going on here? Is this person actually opening up to me? Are they ready to be intimate, emotionally and otherwise? Instead we're trying to put these band-aids on the relationship and make it look better, like you said, appear a certain way other than what it really is.
Yeah, and there are two pieces to that because we could of course be anxious in like the beginning of meeting someone. We don't like know where they stand, we don't know where it's going, and men have like a different timeline of commitment than women tend to. Like we can fall pretty quickly, and while a man can like start to like you, like his path to like falling in love is actually different than ours, and it usually is longer. And if we tend to, as women, and this is something I would do all the time, is like the guy had something about him that I was like really attracted to, and pictures that I had in my head of like what it would be like in the future, and like just started dating him. It wasn't that early in, but already like envisioning this whole future with this person. And then of course he's not quite sure, it's still really early, and this is where we see like kind of anxious attachment kind of coming up. Then I'm like trying all these things to be like, okay, but like, is he going to commit to me or not? And like, what are the things to do so I don't screw it up or scare him away? And a lot of that was like my own stuff as well, just like not feeling secure in myself, not feeling like worthy in myself, that I would like need to go be something or appear some certain way, instead of just being like, okay, like I know I'm like worthy, I'm good enough, like let's just see where this goes, versus like needing to like pin it down right away and needing him to do certain things so I could feel safe or comfortable. Like putting a lot of my worth and like all of whether I was going to feel good or not in what he was doing.
Yeah, that is so huge. And it's interesting too, because I love what you said about part of it, maybe that you're anxious about what he's up to because maybe his attachment style isn't totally secure, but also really just looking at yourself and looking at, okay, well, I'm anxious also because maybe I'm not totally secure.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was not something I realized at the time, and actually for many years. So I had this like cycle of I would be falling for these guys, and then there was something about them that I really was attracted to. And it, when I started to do some of that inner work and started to look at my patterns, because at the time I didn't see some correlation between what was happening. But later on, when I was like, okay, like literally this is happening to me all the time. There's got to be something here. But in the beginning, it would be I'd be falling for these guys who there was something about them that was like unreachable. Really, that's what it was. Like there was something unreachable about them. And to me, that was like, oh, that's what love feels like that longing, the little bit of anxiety, like not knowing if he's going to be there or not. I always thought the guys I really like are going to disappear, but that was some unconscious thing going on. So I'm like falling for guys who are going to disappear. And then I would like kind of seesaw between that. So I'd be falling for those guys. That wouldn't work out. I'd be like, okay, you know what? I'm going to find a guy who's like totally like committed to me and not going anywhere. So then I would go for that guy, but I wasn't really like in love with him. It was like safe though, because he wasn't going to
Right.
break my heart. So
But
it was
not
like that
actually
kind of,
fulfilling.
yeah, yeah.
That's huge. So, if somebody who's listening is not totally sure if they've been going for people who are maybe not actually emotionally available, or if they've been part of this sort of seesaw of safe avoidant, how might they start to identify that within themselves and to see that pattern?
Yeah, so I always say just like you just look back at your previous experiences with men, and usually these patterns just keep repeating. So you could even look at like the last one or the last two, and you'll just see like, is this happening? Like, am I falling for men who ultimately won't commit to me? Do I have this like anxiety coming up? And at the same time, like if someone's getting too close, do I want to push them away? Because that can also be another pattern where it's like, you are maybe choosing men who are more secure or maybe even more on the anxious side, but then that's safe in the sense, at least that was for me, that like they're not going anywhere. And then I would be like more avoidant. I'd be like, well, I don't want to get too close. Like let me create a little distance. And really behind that is like that's also the reason for chasing the unavailable man, because he's not going to get too close.
Yeah.
Just look at like what has happened with the last, I don't know, one man, two men that you fell for or were seriously dating, and look at like, okay, so within me, like what were the emotional patterns that I had, and what were the patterns with how he and I were kind of interplaying with each other? What was that dynamic like? And start to get curious about like, what do I see going on here?
I love that. It's interesting too, while you were speaking, something kind of clicked for me that, what you were saying about your attraction, it's like your attraction was actually to that attachment style versus maybe to that person even. Maybe they had, well, I don't know, maybe they had some good things going for them, but it sounds like you were actually drawn into that chase almost more so than to that person themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was almost like that person, and there were certain things that would be very attractive, and it wasn't always the same thing about each of those people, but it would be that like slight sense of like, he's not really secure, like I don't feel safe in this. Really, there are these little hints that maybe he's not ready or not looking for something, and it'd be the red flag that maybe I would just completely overlook, right? Because I'm like, well, he'll come around. And this is where then you see all the literature about how to get the unavailable guy or the like non-committal guy to like want to commit to you. So we can spend like all of our energy just like trying to do that instead of looking at ourselves and being like, okay, but why is that what I'm attracted to? Like, why is this the pattern that keeps playing out? Like maybe, because this is what I ended up seeing, was like, okay, in all of these failed relationships and all of these broken hearts, like there was literally only one thing that was at the center of all of it, which is me, right? So maybe it's time to look at like, okay, what's going on with me? And that was really the journey then into myself and like all of this inner work that I needed to be doing, instead of looking outside of myself and being like, okay, what can I learn about how to get the man to be attracted to me or to commit to me, versus just like, let's just start with me. And then on top of that, it is helpful to understand things about men because they aren't like women. And so there'll be things that you could misread if you don't know about how he works, right? But at the end of the day, it's like, how do I feel within myself? That's the first thing that matters the most.
I love that. So important. And also, just while you were talking too, it almost sounds like, ways that we're addicted or we're attached to the pattern. Like it's the thrill of the chase, and it's almost like that energy. The word addiction just kind of keeps coming to mind. Like we don't see that that's what's going on, but we keep reaching for the same thing over and over and over again, even though it's kind of destructive to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an addiction to that kind of a feeling, right? Because that's very exciting. I don't know where it's going. I don't know what's going to happen. And that anxiety, like for me, that was literally like in my definition of love, which of course I didn't know when that was happening, but literally for me, like, what does love feel like? What does it feel like when I'm with a guy I want to be with? It felt like that, like the longing, the anxiety, the addiction to like his attention, the texts coming in or not coming in, right? And like that
You can
excitement and
also
that
then the
drama.
complaints with your friends, the explosions with your friends, guys, is he into me? How do we do this? There's a whole,
Yeah.
it's just a whole, like you were saying, energy drain, but it can actually feel exciting while it's happening, even though it's a total distraction from, our truth and our true healing.
Yeah, and I love that you said, the bringing in the friends, and like I had noticed at some point that I was like, what, so much of my conversation with my friends is just around my drama with guys. Like that's what's connecting us, is like, what's going to happen if that's not there? What if my love life is like actually going great and there isn't any of that to bring up? It's like that calmness and that stillness and that peace can feel really uncomfortable and like something's wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah. And almost like, well, now what do I relate about people, my girlfriends with, if we're not kind of putting this guy down for what he's doing or not doing, then what are we talking about, or what's the exciting thing? But then it's, for me at least, it's, okay, how do I take this energy that's no longer being run down the drain and use it to actually build something in my life that I feel excited about, whether it's a partnership or really anything.
Yeah, yeah. For me, it would be before my 20s, I didn't really date. I would like have this one guy that I'd be in love with for years, but he never would know, right? And I'd be pining at a distance because I was like, well, I know it's going to take all my energy. I'm going to focus on my studies as like a student. Like I want to get the straight A's, and I don't have time for that, right? So I'd like push it away and keep it away. And if a guy would get too interested in me, I'd like run the other direction. I was like, no, can't handle that. And so I had the energy. I just was putting my energy into other things because I didn't know how to like balance it, right? Like I didn't know how to I can have that relationship, I can be dating and not have it just consume me. So it would be one or the other. That was what would happen.
That's huge. That's mastery. I mean, what you're talking about there is like mastery of life because we have all of these energies happening all the time. And it's interesting. So I teach meditation, and most
Mhm.
people relate to meditation through Buddhism. And of course, in Buddhism, most Buddhist monks, all Buddhist monks, have taken vows of asceticism. They are living a life free of desire. And so, a lot of people who, at least I work with, have this understanding, which I would say is a deep, deep misunderstanding of really what Buddhism is about, and also about living life as a spiritual being is about, that we need to let go of our desires. The
Mhm.
thing is, though, that desire is very charged, and we don't know how. We can know how to, but it's not necessarily easy for us to know how to work with desire in our life in a way that we are the master of it, which is what you were talking there. It's like we feel this energy, it's so charged, we understand that it's so powerful. And I don't just mean desire in an intimate relationship, really desire for anything, desire for tasty food, because right, monks eat like rice and very plain food.
Mhm.
Desire for money, desire for status, or all these different things that we might have in our life, none of which are inherently bad. It's just, how do we really master those energies versus let them run the show? And that's sort of like, in some ways, the end all be all of a lot of spiritual practices is truly finding mastery over these forces, which are just inherently really, really powerful.
Yeah, and I think this is like really, really key to how do we find that person? How do we actually have that be a healthy relationship? Actually get to the point of having a relationship. As women, our primary, if we were to look in terms of the masculine and the feminine, like the feminine's primary drive is like love and connection, right? Intimacy. Whereas the masculine's primary drive is like purpose, mission, focus, like the single mindedness. And it's not about like love, right? That's not what it is. And so when we, as like more feminine beings, like we want that partner in our lives, we like really want that relationship. Um, what happens is we can get so attached to that, right, to that one person, and to needing that to give us something, right? And so the desire for that almost comes from this place of like not being full, not being filled already, not being whole already, not being enough already. And so when it's not within us already, that sense of just like completeness and wholeness, we will be looking outside of ourselves, right, for that person who's going to give that to us, give me that feeling of being loved, give me that feeling of being secure, like I belong, like I have my person. And if we haven't already found that within ourselves, it is almost impossible. In fact, like you're not going to have a healthy relationship. Maybe you find someone, maybe he also has that same neediness within him, and then you get like a codependent relationship. Or you chase the guy because he's like, wait, I like, you're wanting too much for me. Like you need to already be coming to that person, to that relationship from a place of like the centeredness within yourself. And yes, this is the work. This is like the work to do, right? Is like, how do I do that? How do I get to that place?
It's huge. It's so huge. And when you're talking too, especially in the desire with men, what I've discovered, I'm curious if you could speak to this too in your work with your clients. Whether or not we're saying anything, or even we're outwardly doing something, I've noticed that men, they can feel it, they can sense it. Whenever that neediness comes up, it's like as soon as it's gone, I'll get the text back, or as soon as I've gotten through that, then something can happen. But so long as that energy is there it is, although somebody might not even consciously be aware that they're tapping into it, they're feeling it, it's 100% creating some sort of tension or drama within the relationship.
Yeah. I'd like to say that like he knows if like you're so attached to him and like waiting on that text and thinking about him, like he can feel that. And not only is it just like somehow he just senses that that's happening, but like when he does message, the way that you're going to respond is going to be different than how you'd respond if you were just living your life and happy to have a text from him, but also not like in that needy place of needing to hear from him. Or, you know, you finally see him on the date, like the energy that you'll bring is different than if you were just living your life. And then now I'm on the date with you and I'm happy to be here versus like, I'm trying to get something from you. I need you to make me feel good. I need you to make me feel safe. The language that we'll use and the energy that comes often is so different.
Absolutely. And that's why what you were saying in the very beginning about those kind of the self-help, I would say the antiquated self-help of here, how do I make myself look like I'm not super needy, but not actually dealing with the energy of the neediness itself. And so great on paper, maybe we're texting certain ways or we're showing up certain ways, but the truth is that we're not, because our energy is not, and people 100% feel it. They might not know that they're feeling it, they might not understand any of that, but they 100% do.
Yeah. I mean, this is the other dynamic with all these guys that I would fall in love with and then decide that they actually weren't really available, but then I'm trying to get them to be, right, want to commit to me. The things that would happen on the dates, it would be, I'd be like trying to pretend to be totally unattached, but actually it's not unattachment that's attractive to a man either, because he also wants love, but it's how do you give from a place of like connection and love, but not the neediness, right? Like if I'm showing up on the date and like kind of scared, like what's going to happen, maybe I'll say the wrong thing, like the energy that I'm going to have in that date is different. It's not this like centered, grounded, also open to connection, because actually I'm sort of trying to protect myself. So I'm not going to be all of who I am. He's not going to get to connect to my heart. I'm not really going to be able to connect to him. He's almost like this object to me that I need him to give me something, right? So I can feel secure versus I'm just open, right? I'm here, I'm open, I'm loving being with you. I hope it goes somewhere, but I'm also okay either way. Totally different energy.
Yeah, so huge what you're talking about. That is the key right there. That is it. That's it. And for many of us, easier said than done. Like you were saying in the beginning, it really does take that inner work for most of us to unlock that. I mean, there's plenty of people who maybe that's not their biggest lesson in life or learning curve, or, they've mastered that in some other way. But for probably most people who are tuning in to the love, dating, and relationships, that's probably what most of us need to learn about. But so I want to move into, you have found a lot of mastery with all of this, maybe in part through those trials and errors and in your own path. And I know that you are currently engaged. So can you lead us a little bit further along in the story now that we understand this key that will help us unlock relationship excellence, how that manifested in your life and how that came to fruition for you?
Yeah. So I hinted at this, but I'd had this pattern repeating several times, like through my 20s. And I was like getting into my later 20s and starting to be like, okay, I'm watching like all these people I know, they're getting engaged, they're getting married, they're even starting families. And I'm like, and I'm here, like my career is going great. I'm so happy with where I am with my friends, everything else in my life. But like this partner thing, it's like not working. So I had like fallen in love with this guy again, like that, like anxious attachment piece coming up too early, like wanting to be like with him in a relationship too early, ignoring the red flags that he really wasn't ready. And he ghosted me. I was like, oh, I knew that was going to happen and it still hurt so much. And I had all these visions of like what it could have been like. And I was like, I just don't understand. Why couldn't he just see how great it would have been? And I started to just be like, okay, I'm like, this is that moment where I get to decide, am I going to change something here? Or am I just going to like be heartbroken and not have anything change? And the way I always approach everything that happens, that really I didn't want to happen is like, okay, what's like the lesson? What's the growth here? And I had moved away from spirituality quite a bit over the years. And that moment like brought me back to like, I want to just like meditate. I just want to be quiet and still and just ask like, what's going on? Like, why is this happening? Like, there's obviously something to do with me. um, and so I started to do some of the inner work. You know, I worked with someone. I started to read different kinds of things than I had been reading before. I started to meditate a lot and just ask these questions about why is this repeating? Like, why is this happening? And I got a lot of healing. I did a lot of healing work around where that actually had been coming from that I had totally been unaware of my whole life. You know, stuff from childhood that I had not assigned any importance or meaning to. And so I started to do that work, and I love dancing. So I would go out dancing, and that was how I would sometimes meet people, you know, friends, but also like single men. And,
That's how I would meet people.
yeah.
Darn Corona. I love dancing. I don't drink anymore, but I still love dancing. And so that's what I would do too, is go out dancing. I love that.
Yeah. So I do salsa, like Latin dancing and that sort of thing. And so I would just go to these workshops just for me because I loved it. And I never put any pressure on like, am I going to meet someone here or not? But I just go have fun. And I was kind of developing some of my like more sensual, like feminine side, which I really kind of shut down over the years. And so that was a practice for me just in and of itself. So I'm at this workshop. It's like January, very beginning of January. There's like a snowstorm coming. I was supposed to be an all-day workshop, and I'm there, and I just noticed this guy who's like kind of attractive, and I saw him interacting with a woman in the workshop, and I just liked the way he was like answering her questions and like the way he was holding himself, and I was like, oh, this is like a really nice guy. Now, my thing was I always ran away from nice guys. I was not interested in them. They felt too secure and too stable. They were not interesting to me. But I had done some work around that. So I saw him. I noticed him. Somehow we started chatting a little bit, and then the workshop was canceled like early because of the snowstorm. And so he came up to me and he was like, oh, would you like to go get lunch? So I was like, yeah, sure. So we went to get lunch. We had like an amazing conversation. He asked me more questions than anybody has like ever asked me, just about me, trying to get to know me, which by the way is a really good sign. And so, yeah, we had a great conversation. The end of that sort of lunch date, he asked me out like later that or the next week for actual dinner. And then, you know, we traded numbers and went our ways. So we went on 3 dates after that. And I was just like, you know what? I'm just like, I don't feel like this spark. Like, I don't feel the chemistry that I want to feel. Like, he's a nice guy, but I'm just like, I'm not feeling it. And I'm trying to be true to myself, and I don't want to waste my time with the wrong guy anymore, because that was a commitment I had made, like no more wasting time. So I literally ghosted him after 3 dates. He had like sent me a message, and he never texted in between the dates, by the way, which is something I always tell my clients about. Like, guys, it's not a sign of anything. What he would do is he would plan the next date at the end of the date. So we had a time set, you know, and then I wouldn't hear from him. And that was actually part of why I was like, you know what? And also he doesn't seem that interested in me. So you know what? No. So I just ghosted him. So that was the first
I understand that. I understand that. Yeah, men are different. Everybody communicates differently. And that's been a big learning experience for me on my dating path, is like what was true, or maybe I assumed to be true of one man, isn't necessarily true of another. And so the amount of different communication styles out there is as varied as the amount of different humans out there. So somebody not texting in between dates could mean nothing. But it's also, you know, your preference. Like, I like to be communicated with. Obviously, in the first few dates, that's, you know, you're just getting to know one another. But ultimately, to go off into astrology, I have a lot of Gemini in my chart. I'm Cancer and I'm Gemini. So I feel things very deeply. But I'm also like chatty and intellectual. And communication is so part of how I feel close to somebody. So if I don't hear from them for an entire week, I've gone from like, cool, we're close, to I'm in left field. Do you still exist in my reality? I'm not. Or we're going on a date. Oh, it's like a first date all over again a little bit. Like I need to pick up the distance that's been left between us.
Yeah.
Not to go off too much on
No,
a
that was
tangent.
100% the way I felt about it. Like, I was like, this has never happened before. What is this? Like, normally that means someone's not interested in me. Like they're not that serious.
Right.
Except for that he was like planning the next date at the end of the date. And it was actually a big thing that I had to decide was, am I okay with this guy who doesn't really text in between dates? But what that actually did was it weaned me off of that attachment to like needing the high of the text and just like all of that stuff, which wasn't necessarily about the guy. It was about my like fantasy of who he was, right? Because texting is not, it's not the relationship, but I
Right.
always assumed it was, and I treated it like that. And so that had been part of what would happen with when a guy who I was interested in wasn't texting, I'd be like, oh my God, he's not interested. Like, let me see if I can get him back in. And like, it may have been a misunderstanding of like why a man is going to text anyways. And yes, with my fiance, texting was not his thing. He would call me if he wanted to talk, but he wasn't texting in between until later on when we'd actually like committed more to each other than like in the beginning. He was like, well, I mean, I'm not sure. So I'm not going to put the time into the texting, right? Like, I'll call you, I'll schedule the dates. He didn't tell me this, right? But that was what it was.
That was his mindset. And it also strikes me that, those people maybe are people that are of high value per the work that you do with women, because they're doing other things. They're busy living their life. They're not just, chilling, texting for hours on end. I mean, that can happen too. And there's nothing wrong with that. And especially for me, because I am very conversational and that's how I feel close to people. At a certain point, I will need that. I've dated people who that's just simply not the way that they connect. And it is at a certain point becomes a challenge, because that's how on some level I feel close to somebody. But yeah, absolutely, it could mean that they're just living, that they have a sense of purpose, that they have a sense of wholeness that doesn't need to come through late night texts.
Yeah. And I mean, that was him, right? There are plenty of men who are not like that. That was Eric, right?
Right.
I just had to decide, like, aside from the texting, do I like this person? Like, do I want to keep seeing this person as a human being versus is he just texting me as part of like how I'm going to decide,
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So anyways, we have a very long story, and it was all me, like, going through my path and my journey of like really doing more of that work. So, still being kind of attached to that anxious, like, adrenaline rush, right? And not feeling that around him because he was such a stable, secure person that there was nothing about him that was going to make me think he's going to like disappear or, not be who he is, right? And not keep showing up until, whatever was going to happen. He's just so secure. And to me, that was never something I was attracted to. So I ghosted him. And
It's
then,
almost like we need to reprogram how we're reading our emotions or how we're reading our feelings. Because, listening to you talk about it, it's like, oh, this is what I'm used to feeling. And now I need to it's not trust myself, but it's get a different relationship with those feelings and look a little bit closer at what are they really telling me? Are they really telling me that this is something I should not be part of? Or are they actually indicating that maybe I have some fear coming up or some other, emotions that need a deeper look?
yeah, and that's so important. I get this question a lot, is like, how do I tell the difference between like my fear and my intuition? Because it can be very difficult to tell, especially when if you look back at your like past patterns with men, if you've had experiences of not choosing the right men for you, getting your heart broken, being ghosted, the unavailable man, like to some extent, like the emotions that you're thinking should be guiding you are actually not the ones that should be. And this is so confusing because it's like you can't trust your intuition, but it's like you have an intuition and then you're misreading what is intuition.
And because talking with other people and through my own experience, intuition can sometimes be really quiet, whereas those other emotions, I almost am worried, I don't really want to call them emotions even, but those reactions can be so loud. And so because they're so loud, it's like, oh, that must be the truth. Whereas, and maybe that's why meditation is so important. If we got a little bit quieter, we might start to weed out, no, this is just the noise that's kind of covering right now the deeper intuition that's really speaking to me about what my truth is.
Yeah. And it can be so hard to access that when your nervous system is wired not to have the stillness and the calmness, So is actually a big part of like what happened with Eric and I was, so he ended up showing up at my dance class. About, I don't know, maybe a month and a half later. We'd run into each other once on the train after I'd ghosted him. I was like, I've never run into anyone I've dated before.
The universe kept trying to bring him back in.
Yeah. And then he shows up in my dance class because I had told him that day we'd met at a dance workshop where I took classes or just made a recommendation. And then you stay on the same level for like several months. So I was on this level and he caught up to the level that I was on. He will swear that he did not do that to try to meet me. He just walked into my dance class one day.
What dance class was it? What was it, ballet or something?
It was a salsa class. And yeah. So he walks in and I was like, oh my God, like this is awkward. And decided to just be like, well, it happens. Like we stopped talking to each other. Like maybe we can just still be friendly. So we just were friendly. Didn't really bring up that I had kind of disappeared. And then, for several weeks, we'd see each other at dance class and we started like getting more friendly again. I was like, oh, I kind of still like him. Why did I run away? And so he started asking me out and I was like so determined at that time that I was like not going to waste my time on a guy who I didn't think was it. Cause that was what I'd been doing for so long was like, I'd end up in relationships with guys who were safe, but I wasn't into, like wasn't in love with.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I was like, I'm not going to do that again. Like I'm done breaking their hearts. I'm done wasting my time. So I kept like being so hesitant with him. And like, he'd ask me out and I'd be like, oh no, I'm busy. We'd run into each other on like the weekend, dance, like, I don't know, what was it called? Havana. I don't know where you are, but,
yes. Yeah.
We'd run
into each other. I don't know Havana, but if you've been in Boston, you probably know it.
So it's like a social dancing event, right? And so we see each other there and we would dance a little bit. And I started to like, because I was continuing to do my work to be like, okay, what's all the patterning going on? And am I right or wrong to be running away from him? And like found that I had this pattern of like running away from guys. And that was almost why it was easier for me to just pine after an unavailable guy, right? Than actually have true intimacy with someone. And so, he finally asked me out and I finally said yes. So we started dating again. And we had I ran away several times from him. I'm very lucky that he wasn't just like, I'm done.
But talking about, masculine and feminine energies as well, not to say that we should play hard to get, but there's something about like persistence that's part of that, purpose and mission and dedication. So it's an energy that men don't mind contacting. It can actually be very purposeful and enlivening.
And I mean, it worked in this case because it wasn't on purpose, right? I wasn't like pretending to be not interested while really wanting him to like chase. So when a guy decides that someone is the one for him, he's not so easily, like he's not just going to be dissuaded if she says no. if he's sure she's the one, he's going to keep trying. Yeah, so we started dating again, and this is going back to the fear versus the intuition thing. I had been through a very challenging relationship in my early 20s, and one that really left me pretty gun shy about getting too close to someone, because it had been, there had been things that went on that were not healthy and not good. And so I had these triggers kind of left over from that experience. And so, Eric at one point triggered something in me that went back to this, that felt like control or manipulation, or not listening to me. And I completely had a total trauma response, totally triggered, and literally took 3 weeks to actually come back to balance nervous system around it, and see whether or not I'd been accurate in being so triggered by him and thinking he was doing this or that, and that he might not be a guy who was good, and that was this is the moment where we see that fear versus intuition, because it felt like this is intuition telling me run away, this is not going to be a good guy for you. And it had been a very small thing that he had done, but it was enough, because I was so looking for red flags for any sign of that happening again with someone, that 3 weeks my nervous system was kind of wrecked. And I could not tell if it was him or if it was a trigger for me. And at the time I didn't really have enough awareness to know that might have been just a trigger.
Yeah,
And
huge.
so,
And especially when it's something that's so core or sensitive, the energy around that trigger, again, I kind of liken it to noise. It's so loud. It's almost like we can't see through this haze and this fog. And in a way, I talk sometimes in my teachings about the negative ego, it's kind of, that's its purpose. It's trying to blindside you a little bit. You could think of it as a trickster, or just simply, blind spot in our vision. But especially I can imagine during those really charged moments, it's really hard to see clearly what's happening. Just went off there, but
yeah.
So
Yeah. And so, this is
I understand that.
yeah. Yeah. And this is really the core of us being able to attract that partnership that's going to be really good for us and really healthy for us. And because I could have so easily, as I had done before, taken that as a moment that this is who he is, this is not going to be good for me, and literally walked away and done, right? Rinse my hands of it, I'm done. Which is what I would have done every point up until that. But I've been doing so much of the work around me, that I was okay, I need to put into practice some of this stuff that I'm learning about, and so he was still going to my dance classes. I just wasn't really wanting to talk to him. And so it was one night, and I finally come back to the balance, and I'd observed that he had not continued to chase me when I told him I needed my space. He was there, he wasn't going anywhere, but he also was completely pulled back his energy into just I'm just here, but not chasing me, not pressuring me, all the things that would have triggered the hell out of me and made me just never, ever, ever give another chance. And so I just observed who he was in my trigger. Was he was able to actually just walk through it. And this was a big part of what got me to be hey, I think I'm gonna have this tough conversation that I don't ever have with anybody about why I did what I did, and let's sit down and see how does he respond to that, and maybe there's something here. But this entire time, that from when we first met to that point, I had not fallen in love with him. I liked him more and more and more. So that's why I kept seeing him, but it was not the in love, because my old version of in love was wrong. It was unhealthy, right? And so it was basically a process of rewiring my nervous system around what is a healthy relationship? What does love feel like? And what can I actually hold in me and handle? So that moment we had a conversation. I really was just like feeling into how do I feel right now with how he is being and how is he responding. And we were like, okay, let's try one more time, like clean slate. And that was it. Like I was fully in after that. But that's our story.
Yeah, I love how he gave you that space, and I love how you gave yourself that space as well to really, you know, have a moment. And when you're talking to, it's kind of reminding me that it's not about perfection. It's not about not having triggers. It's not about, never triggering the other person. But when that does happen, and in some ways it's invariably going to happen, how do we respond? And I love giving yourself that space to respond, and also coming to what in some ways was like a conflict, to have that dialogue or that discussion around whatever had happened. I know for myself that sometimes those hard discussions, which I avoid or I have avoided in the past at, almost at all cost, that's actually where real intimacy can come in. And it's like allowing myself to be seen in a way that I almost never let myself be seen by other people. For me, I've had a weird relationship with anger, where I felt like I couldn't express anger, that was a bad thing for me to express in my relationships. So I remember an early boyfriend in my mid-20s, probably actually, where I just got so mad and I finally expressed it. And after that, I felt more intimate and more connected with him, because I had shown this part of myself which I really hadn't felt that I could show to other people. So I love that story about being triggered and then coming back together with him. It's so powerful.
Yeah. And honestly, like what you just said, that was it. That was what allowed the relationship to actually progress, because I also, like, I had certain emotions I never wanted anyone to see. There were certain things about me that I didn't want anyone to see, right? And so a lot of the work within E first was like loving and accepting myself, and like understanding those different parts of me and allowing those different parts of me. And then the witnessing, right? Like to be witnessed by someone else in our vulnerability, like in those moments when we have shame, when we have fear, when we think we'll be rejected, we're not good enough. And so like for me, it's always been like crying, like so vulnerable. I would never want to cry in front of anybody. And so a lot of my work was around like loving and accepting myself, and like that the little girl in me who had all the sadness that never got to express it, never got to feel the love, because I was always, no, you can't go there. And I would stop like the level of vulnerability that I could really have in a romantic relationship by not allowing someone to see into all the parts of me, and so the conversations that we would have wouldn't be able to go very far because I couldn't open up enough of me.
Yeah. Well, you're talking to, it's reminding me of things I've seen in myself, and just from your story and other people's stories, that, I always say, well, he's not intimate. He's not willing to be intimate, right? It's always kind of on the other person, not recognizing that the pattern of maybe A, choosing somebody who can't be intimate, or B, like running away in those instances, or not really being truthful about how I feel, is actually my fear of intimacy showing up and masquerading as something which I can pin on the other person, which isn't really fair to them.
Yeah. I see all the time women who say like men are unavailable, he's unavailable, he's emotionally unavailable. The attraction to a person who seems to be emotionally unavailable is like our safety, because then we don't have to be emotionally available, right? And so it's always actually a mirror, and how deep we can go with ourselves is only as deep as we can go with someone else.
Maybe a hard pill for some to swallow, but it is the medicine. It's the
Yeah.
medicine. So, like that moment that you shared at the beginning of, do I want to continue down this cycle of unhealthy relationships that aren't satisfying, or do I want to swallow the medicine that maybe doesn't feel so good, doesn't taste so good right now, but will ultimately lead to that satisfying and fulfilling relationship that I desire. Sometimes we got to make that the hard choice there.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, this is the difference between I'm going to read these books that are just going to teach me the right thing to say and do versus I'm going to like do the work to become the person who will just do the things that are going to attract the right person to me, versus I'm going to pretend. And yeah, that is the work. It's not the easy work, but it is what we do so that we can actually have that amazing relationship that we really do want. But it's not like I'm going to get to skip that step.
Yeah, there's no way through but through. I often say that about the spiritual path. No
Yeah.
way through but through. You have shared so many valuable tidbits for folks who have listened in, and I've just been so happy to share this time with you today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It was a great conversation. So
Absolutely.
many
And
juicy bits there.
oh, what's that?
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so for anybody who's been listening in, they want to go deeper with this work. I know that on your website, you have an attachment style quiz. So if people are curious, have I maybe actually, unbeknownst to myself, been acting from a different attachment style other than secure? Maybe I am secure, and that's great and wonderful. They can take that quiz on your site. And I'll also have other links where people can connect with you if they want to go deeper into any of the work that you've shared so far.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you again so much. And thank you everybody for joining in.